I'm Corey, 33, and I guess you could say my family and I have always had a complicated relationship. The kind of we love you but also secretly resent you dynamic that makes every holiday feel like walking into a lion's den wrapped in a gift bough. It wasn't always that way, though. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the kid who stayed out of trouble and tried to keep peace while my older brother, Evan, was the golden child, the loud, charming, football-playing, dad's favorite type. He could do no wrong, even when he very obviously did. For most of my life, I just accepted that. You learn early on that fighting for fairness in a family like ours is like arguing with a brick wall. It only leaves you exhausted. But I still tried. I helped my parents when they got older, fixed things around their house, covered bills when they forgot to pay something. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd notice that while Evan chased get-rich-quick schemes and borrowed money from everyone he knew, I was the one actually showing up. That illusion shattered on my 33rd birthday. It started innocently enough, a small family gathering at my mother's house. I hadn't really wanted to go, but my mom insisted. Come on, Corey, it's just dinner. We haven't all been together in months. I should have known better. Whenever she said family dinner, it meant Evan holding court at the table, everyone pretending not to notice the tension floating in the air like static. I arrived with a simple bottle of wine and a quiet smile, hoping to get through the night without incident. My mother greeted me with her usual half hug, the kind where her arms barely touch your shoulders. My father was in his chair, already watching the news at full volume. And then there was Evan, loud, confident, smirking like he owned the place, with his wife and their son, Tyler, who was around 12 and clearly inherited his father's arrogance. Corey, look who decided to show up, Evan called out, clapping me on the back like he was doing me a favor. What's it been, 6 months? Thought you finally moved out of the state to chase another one of your big ideas. I forced a smile. Nope, still here, just busy with work. Work? He repeated, grinning at his son. That's when you sit at a computer all day pretending to make money. Tyler laughed, an obnoxious, forced sound that made my skin crawl. My mother chuckled too, which stung more than I expected. Dinner went the way it always did. Evan dominating the conversation, boasting about his new business venture, which was apparently flipping used cars with some guy from his gym. My father nodded approvingly, as if Evan had just discovered electricity. I sat there, quietly eating, until my mother brought out a small cake with candles and said, All right, everyone, let's sing for Corey. We sang. It was awkward. I smiled and thanked them. And then, out of nowhere, Evan stood up, grinning like he was about to make a toast. Before we cut the cake, he said, Tyler's got something for Uncle Corey. The kid perked up, a mischievous look in his eyes. He reached behind his chair and pulled out a small, wrapped box. Here, he said, tossing it across the table toward me. I caught it midair, surprised. Thanks, buddy, I said, trying to sound genuine. Can I open it? Tyler smirked. Sure, but you might not like it. I peeled back the wrapping paper, and inside was a small, cheap plastic trophy, the kind you'd get for participation in a kid's soccer league. The plaque read, World's Biggest Failure. For a second, I didn't react. I thought maybe it was a joke that would end with, just kidding. But when I looked up, everyone was watching me, waiting. My mother had that uneasy smile that meant she didn't want to intervene. My father just kept eating. And Evan? He was grinning from ear to ear. Come on, laugh a little, Evan said, chuckling. It's just a joke, man. Lighten up. Tyler giggled, clearly pleased with himself. Dad said it's true, though, he blurted out. He said you're just a failure who deserves nothing. The room went silent. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I just stared at the kid, then at Evan, whose grin faltered slightly. Tyler, my mother said weakly. That's not very nice. But before she could finish, Evan cut her off. Relax, Mom. He's just repeating what adults say. Maybe if Corey didn't take everything so seriously, he'd. That's when Tyler picked up the trophy and, with a smug look, tossed it straight into the fireplace. The flames swallowed it instantly, plastic hissing and curling. I froze. Everyone just stared. Then Evan laughed, a loud, careless sound that filled the silence. My mother joined in, a nervous titter. Even my father smirked, shaking his head like it was some harmless prank. Something inside me went cold. I didn't say a word. I stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out. No yelling, no dramatic exit, just quiet footsteps and the sound of the front door closing behind me. I drove home with that image burned into my mind, the trophy melting in the fire while my family laughed. The people who were supposed to have my back thought it was funny to humiliate me on my birthday. When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to figure out what hurt more, their laughter or the fact that I wasn't even surprised. Hours passed. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't check messages. I just sat there numb. Then, around midnight, my phone buzzed, a family group text lighting up the screen. It was from my mother. "Corey," she wrote, "your behavior tonight was uncalled for. Evan just wanted to make you laugh. Since you clearly don't want to be part of this family anymore, you're officially cut out of everything." I read it twice, then a third time. The absurdity of it hit me like a slow wave. They humiliate me, laugh at me, and somehow I'm the problem. I took a deep breath, typed out one sentence, and hit send. Good. Check whose name owns the house you live in. Because they'd forgotten one crucial detail. When my father's business went bankrupt years ago, it was me who bought their house to keep the bank from taking it. They'd been renting it ever since, paying me a token amount that barely covered taxes. I didn't expect what happened next. 10 minutes later, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Calls, texts, notifications stacking on top of each other. Evan, Mom, even Dad. I didn't pick up a single one. By midnight, the missed call counter read 74. And that's where it began. The unraveling. The part of me that had always tried to keep peace finally cracked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized something. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before the storm. And I had a storm coming for them. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was still lighting up like a Christmas tree. 74 missed calls had turned into 92. Text after text flooded the group chat, some pleading, some guilt-tripping, and others just plain angry. "Corey, you went too far. Son, this isn't funny. You scared your mother. You're being childish." And, of course, from Evan, "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare kick your own parents out. Grow up, man." I stared at the screen, not replying to a single one. For years, I'd let things slide. Every jab, every joke. Every time I got sidelined so Evan could shine. But that text about being cut out of everything had crossed a line I didn't even know I had. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it, but when you spend decades being the family punching bag, there's a moment where something inside you snaps, not with rage, but with clarity. That morning, clarity was all I had. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up the property records. There it was in black and white. My name, not theirs, on the deed. I'd taken ownership 6 years ago when Dad's construction business tanked, saving the house from foreclosure. They'd been living there under the illusion that it was still the family home. I never once reminded them because, back then, I thought doing good quietly meant something. I sat there, sipping my coffee, scrolling through their messages, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt calm, detached. By noon, I finally got a text from my mom that made me pause. "Come to the house tonight. We need to talk. No arguments." I almost ignored it, but something told me to go. Maybe I wanted to see just how far this would go. Maybe I wanted to hear them say it to my face, that I was no longer family. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother was sitting at the dining table, hands clasped like she was in a prayer meeting. Dad sat across from her, staring into space. Evan leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, the one that had haunted every family event since high school. "Corey," my mother began, her voice rehearsed and overly gentle. "We think you overreacted last night. Evan didn't mean to upset you. It was all in good fun." "Good fun," I said slowly. "You all laughed when your grandson threw my gift into the fire." "Tyler's just a kid," Evan said, rolling his eyes. "You're the adult. Maybe try acting like one." I turned to him. "So it's fine for your kid to parrot insults about me because you feed them to him? That's parenting now." He leaned forward, smiling like he was about to win an argument on a talk show. "Don't twist my words, little brother. I just tell him the truth. You're always playing victim. Maybe if you actually did something with your life, he'd look up to you." That last line landed like a knife. My father cleared his throat. "That's enough, both of you. Corey, you need to understand, your brother's been through a lot. He's trying to get his business off the ground. We've all been trying to support him. Of course. Always the same story. Always Evan struggles, never mine." "Support him how?" I asked. By pretending his car flipping scheme is a business? By ignoring that he owes half this town money? Or by laughing at me every chance you get? My mother sighed heavily, her voice trembling with that fake disappointment she'd mastered over the years. Qley, we've tried so hard to include you. You're the one who keeps isolating yourself. You barely visit. You don't tell us what's going on in your life. We never know how you're doing. Because every time I do, I snapped. Evan finds a way to make it a competition. If I say work's going well, he says his is better. If I mention buying a new car, he mocks it. And you laugh. Every single time. Evan chuckled. You're so sensitive, man. No wonder you're single. That one hit a nerve. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I looked at my parents, hoping, just hoping, one of them would say something. Defend me. Tell Evan to stop. But they just sat there, eyes downcast. That silence told me everything. I stood up slowly, chair scraping against the tile. You know what? You're right. I am done isolating myself from this. I gestured around the table. From pretending we're some kind of family. My mother stood quickly, her tone shifting from guilt to panic. Don't do this, Qley. This isn't what your father and I wanted. Then maybe you should have thought about that before laughing when your grandson called me a failure. Evan stood up too, towering over me. Oh, quit the drama. You're not going to kick them out. You don't have the guts. You're bluffing because you finally realized no one cares about your pity act. I stared at him for a long time, then smiled faintly. We'll see. I walked out again, the same way I had the night before. Calm, controlled, but my hands were shaking by the time I got to my car. The next few days were quiet, eerily so. No calls, no texts. It was like they decided to freeze me out completely. I tried to focus on work, but every time I sat at my desk, my mind replayed the laughter, the fire, the sound of plastic melting. Then came the second hit. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was some boring tax notice, but when I opened it, my stomach turned. It was a request from my father, an official document, asking to transfer partial ownership of the house back to him for family stability. Evan's signature was on the bottom as a witness. I almost laughed. The audacity was surreal. They were actually trying to legally take back what they'd lost because of their own financial disasters. I didn't sign, of course. Instead, I took a photo of the document and sent it in the group chat with one message, bold move. Evan replied 5 minutes later, don't play games. Just sign it. You don't even live here. My mother added, we're just trying to make things simple, Qley. It's still the family home. I typed slowly, no, it's my home. Your tenants. That message didn't go over well. Within an hour, Evan was at my door. I didn't even know he remembered where I lived. He knocked so hard the picture frames rattled. When I opened it, he pushed past me like he owned the place. All right, enough of this power trip, he said, pacing the living room. You think holding the house over their heads makes you look strong? It makes you look pathetic. I think it makes me look like someone who's done being disrespected. He laughed, shaking his head. You really think Mom and Dad will ever forgive you for this? You're turning your back on them. They're our parents. Funny, I said quietly. Where was that loyalty when you were letting your kid insult me in front of them? He stopped pacing, eyes narrowing. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You taught him it was okay to treat me like dirt, and they followed your lead. Now you're mad because I'm not bowing down anymore. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You're gonna regret this, Qley. You've always been jealous. That's what this is really about. I actually laughed. A dry, hollow sound. Jealous? Of what, Evan? Your debt? Your temper? Your kid learning to mock people instead of respect them? That one landed. His face flushed red, and for a second, I thought he might actually swing at me. But then he just scoffed, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the hinges. After he left, I sat there in silence again. The same quiet that had filled my car that first night. Except this time, it wasn't numbness, it was resolve. The next day, my mother called, crying. She said I was tearing the family apart, that I was breaking her heart. She said, your brother's just under pressure. He didn't mean any harm. And for the first time in my life, I didn't cave. Then maybe he should have thought of that before trying to steal my property, I said flatly. She sniffled. You wouldn't really do anything drastic, would you? I didn't answer. A few days later, things started getting weird. Someone left a voicemail pretending to be from the city's property office, saying there was a discrepancy with my ownership papers. It took me 2 minutes to verify the number was fake. Guess who it traced back to? Evan's so-called business partner. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty family drama anymore. This was a power play. I started keeping records, texts, voicemails, documents, everything. I wasn't about to be blindsided by their manipulation again. Still, I didn't respond. Silence was my weapon now. Every time they tried to provoke me, I ignored it. Every time they texted, "We just want to talk," I let it sit unread. Until one night, about 2 weeks later, I got a picture message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my parents' house, the one I owned, with the caption, "You wouldn't really throw your family out, would you?" And underneath, a second line, "Because we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." That was the moment it stopped being emotional and became strategic. Because if they wanted to play games, I could play better. It's strange how quickly a family can go from awkward silence to outright warfare. For a while, I thought the message with the photo of their house was the worst of it, a cheap scare tactic from Evan, meant to guilt-trip me back into submission. But I underestimated how far he was willing to go once his pride was on the line. By the time 3 more weeks passed, I'd stopped hearing from my parents altogether. No calls, no texts. I figured they'd either given up or were too embarrassed to admit they'd lost. Part of me actually felt relieved. I went to work, hit the gym, cooked for myself, and for the first time in years, I slept without grinding my teeth. But peace never lasts long in a family like mine, not when manipulation is their favorite language. It started one Friday morning when I got a call from my bank. The woman on the line sounded professional, calm, but something in her tone told me this wasn't a routine call. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we're calling to verify that you recently attempted to take out a second mortgage on your property." I froze. "Excuse me?" "Yes," she continued. "We received an online application this morning under your name. However, there are a few inconsistencies in the documentation that raised red flags." My heart started pounding. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Well," she said carefully, "the employment information and signature don't match your records. We wanted to confirm before proceeding." It took me a second to find my voice. "That's not me. Someone's trying to use my name." She paused. "I see. We'll flag the attempt immediately and begin a fraud investigation. You'll receive the official report by mail, and we recommend contacting the police to file a statement as well." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Evan might have been impulsive, but he wasn't stupid, and the timing was too perfect. After weeks of silence, suddenly someone tries to mess with the ownership of my house. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to connect the dots. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, half rage, half disbelief. There's something uniquely painful about realizing your own brother would forge your name to try to steal what you worked for, not because he needed it, but because he couldn't stand you having control. By the evening, my phone lit up again, this time with a text from Mom. "Please come by tomorrow. There's been a misunderstanding." No apology, no explanation, just that one cryptic message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won. So the next day, I drove to their house. My house. When I pulled up, there was a new car in the driveway, a shiny black SUV that screamed, "Evan finally conned someone again." The porch lights were on even though it was the middle of the day, and through the window, I could see movement. I took a deep breath and walked in without knocking. The first thing I saw was my mother sitting at the kitchen table, wringing her hands. My father was there too, looking uncomfortable. And, of course, Evan was leaning against the counter with that smug, self-satisfied look I'd come to despise. "Hey there, little brother," he said, as if we were catching up over coffee. "Glad you could make it." I didn't answer. "What's going on?" Mom jumped in quickly. "Corey, please don't be angry. We just wanted to clear the air. Things have gotten out of hand." "Out of hand," I said slowly. "You mean the part where someone tried to forge my signature to take a mortgage out on this house?" My father looked up sharply. "What? What are you talking about?" I turned my gaze to Evan. He didn't even flinch. "Come on," he said, shrugging. "You think you're the only one who can play hardball? You want to throw your family out? We'll find a way to fight back." "You tried to commit fraud?" I said, my voice rising for the first time. "That's not fighting back. That's a felony." "Stop exaggerating." Mom snapped, her tone suddenly sharp. "We didn't do anything illegal. Evan was just trying to help. He said he could manage the mortgage better and—" "Mom," I cut her off. "You knew?" Her eyes darted away. "Your father didn't want to worry you." Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Corey, listen. Evan said he had a plan to refinance everything so we could all benefit. He said you were fine with it. I never said that. I shouted. You all signed my name without asking me. Evan laughed under his breath. You're so dramatic. It didn't even go through. Relax. There it was again, that dismissive tone, like my outrage was just a tantrum he could smirk his way through. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I should call the police right now, I said quietly. Mom's expression twisted, somewhere between fear and anger. You'd really do that to your own family? I stared at her. You let your son steal from me. You tell me what I'm supposed to call that. She stood up, trembling with indignation. You've always been selfish, Corey. Always holding things over our heads. You never give. You just take and then act like a martyr when people need help. We were trying to fix this family, not break it. My jaw dropped. Fix it? By stealing from me? Evan stepped closer. It's not stealing if it's family property. You're just a caretaker, man. Everyone knows this house belongs to Mom and Dad. That was it. The moment something inside me cracked open. Not from anger, but from pure, exhausted disbelief. I looked around that kitchen, the faded wallpaper, the photos of birthdays and graduations on the walls, and realized I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at people who saw me as a wallet with a pulse. I want you all out, I said finally. Mom gasped. What? You heard me. I'm done. You have 30 days to vacate. You can't be serious, Dad said, standing up. This is our home. It was, I said, until you try to take it from me. Evan sneered. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, turning toward the door. But at least I'll regret it from somewhere honest. I left before they could say another word. My hands were shaking as I got in the car, but I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just sat there staring at the house that had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Later that night, I got another text, this time not from Mom or Evan, but from an unknown number again. It was a video. When I opened it, I froze. It was footage from a security camera, my security camera, showing Evan standing on my porch, looking into the lens, smiling. He held up a key and said, "Guess who still has access?" Then the video cut to black. My stomach dropped. I'd changed the locks months ago, but my parents still had an old spare key, which meant Evan had probably copied it. I checked my home security app. Sure enough, there had been a motion alert earlier that night while I was out grabbing dinner. Someone had entered my house. I called the police immediately, but when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Everything was perfectly in place, except for one thing. On my kitchen counter sat a small, cheap trophy, the same kind Tyler had thrown into the fire. Only this one wasn't melted. It was brand new, shiny, and engraved with the words, "You can't evict blood." I felt my throat close. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was a warning. The officer suggested I change the locks again and file a restraining order if necessary. But what stuck with me wasn't the trophy itself. It was the knowledge that he'd been in my home. My supposed brother had broken into my space just to prove he could. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone standing in the corner. Around 3 a.m., I sat in the dark, scrolling through the photos on my phone, and landed on one from 5 years ago, a family barbecue. I was grilling, Evan was laughing with a beer in his hand, and Mom was smiling proudly. Back then, I'd thought maybe, just maybe, we'd finally grown past the favoritism. That maybe I'd earned my place. Looking at it now, it felt like a photo of strangers. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't warn Evan. I just quietly began the process of eviction. My lawyer told me it would take a few weeks, but once it was finalized, there'd be no going back. For the first time in years, I felt something close to control. But I should have known. People like Evan don't let go without a fight. A few days later, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a printed photo, one of me at my office building. It had clearly been taken that same day, from across the parking lot. Scrawled on the back, in thick black marker, were 4 words. "You're making a mistake." And that's when I realized, this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was war. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid of my own family. Not angry, afraid. That photo taped to my door was the moment the air shifted from tension to threat. I'd lived through years of snide remarks, guilt trips, and emotional manipulation, but being watched crossed a line I didn't even know they were capable of crossing. That night, I locked every door twice and dragged a chair in front of the main entrance. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark with my phone in my hand, waiting for another noise, another message, another sign that Evan was nearby. The silence was heavy, the kind that hums in your ears and makes every creak sound like footsteps. In the morning, I found muddy shoe prints on the side of my porch. They led from the driveway to my back window. My cameras had caught nothing. Evan must have figured out how to dodge their range. That realization made my stomach twist. He'd been watching long enough to learn the blind spots. I called the police again, but like last time, they couldn't do much. "You have no proof it was him," the officer said. "It could be anyone." Anyone. But I knew exactly who it was. I started carrying my phone everywhere, keeping every light on at night. I even parked a few blocks away from my house during the day, just to see if anyone was following me. Paranoia? Maybe. But paranoia starts to feel like common sense when your brother's idea of revenge includes stalking you. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I got a call from my boss. "Corey, can you step into my office for a minute?" The tone was off. I knew immediately it wasn't about work performance. It was personal. When I walked in, she was sitting with a folder open, frowning at something on her desk. "We received an anonymous email this morning," she said carefully. "It contained some concerning information about you." My pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" She turned the folder toward me. Inside was a printed email, complete with screenshots of my social media, a few old forum posts from years ago, and a message claiming I'd been harassing my family and stealing their property. I felt my chest tighten. "This is a lie," I said quickly. "Someone's trying to smear me." "I figured as much," she said gently. "But HR still has to look into it. We'll need to put you on temporary leave while this is sorted out." The words hit harder than I expected. Temporary leave. No paycheck, no distraction from the chaos at home, just more time alone with my thoughts. When I got back to my car, I just sat there staring at the steering wheel. My vision blurred, and for a long moment, I couldn't even breathe properly. This was beyond revenge now. Evan wasn't just trying to humiliate me. He was trying to dismantle my life piece by piece. That afternoon, I drove aimlessly for hours. Through the city, down country roads, anywhere that didn't remind me of them. I ended up at a small lake outside town, parked under a tree, and just sat. The water was still, the sky gray. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how peaceful the world looked when you weren't being hunted by your own blood. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon, watching as my phone buzzed endlessly in the cup holder. Calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't want to hear more apologies or fake concern. I didn't want to hear mom's voice cracking or dad's excuses. I didn't want to hear Evan's smug taunts pretending this was all some game. I wanted silence. When I finally drove home, I noticed my mailbox was slightly open. Inside, there was another envelope. No stamp, no sender. Just my name, scrawled in angry handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Stop trying to take what isn't yours. You're not one of us anymore." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Evan had been leaving me messages since we were kids, notes on my door, on my backpack, on my locker at school. Even his handwriting had that same arrogant tilt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing everything down. Every text, every call, every visit, every incident. Not for revenge, at least not yet, but because I realized I needed to protect myself. I needed a record. I started keeping a binder. Page after page, I printed out screenshots and reports, logging every contact with the police. It became my quiet ritual. When I couldn't sleep, I organized evidence. When I felt helpless, I wrote timelines. It sounds strange, but that binder gave me strength. It was the first time in months I felt like I was doing something, even if no one else knew about it. Meanwhile, things kept unraveling. My mother left a voicemail crying that I'd turned cold and that I was tearing the family apart. My father left another saying he didn't recognize me anymore. Not once did either of them mention Evan's behavior. It was like they'd all silently agreed that if they ignored his actions long enough, I'd give in and apologize. But I didn't. A week later, I got a letter from the city. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming I was illegally renting out the property to an elderly couple without a permit. It was absurd, but it triggered an inspection notice. I could almost hear Evan's laughter when I read it. He was weaponizing bureaucracy now. So I did what I had to. I hired a lawyer full-time. Not the one who'd helped me start the eviction process. Someone new, sharper, colder. I told him everything. Every detail. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes the whole time. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're not paranoid. This is a coordinated attempt to discredit you and possibly pressure you into giving up the property. Don't talk to them directly. Don't respond to anything that's not through me." That was the first real comfort I'd felt in weeks. Still, the silence in my house grew heavier each night. I stopped inviting friends over. I started sleeping on the couch because the bedroom window faced the street, and I couldn't stand the thought of waking up to find someone standing there. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft tapping sound, 3 slow taps against glass. My blood froze. It came from the window near the kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight and crept closer, heart hammering in my chest. When I shone the light, there was no one there. Just fog on the glass and 3 fingerprints smudged into the condensation. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the prints were gone. That was my breaking point. I started packing a bag the next morning, just the essentials. Laptop, documents, a few changes of clothes. I booked a long-term stay at a furnished apartment across town. I told no one, not even my coworkers. The next day, I left the house before sunrise. Driving away, I felt this strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt because I was walking away from the place I'd worked so hard to protect. Relief because I was finally free from the constant fear of who might be outside my window. The apartment was small but quiet. No history, no ghosts, no photos of fake smiles on the wall. I could finally breathe again. For the first few days, I barely did anything. I slept. I cooked simple meals. I walked around the neighborhood, learning the streets. My lawyer handled everything else. Every so often, I'd get a new message from my family, each one more desperate than the last. "Please talk to us. We didn't mean it to go this far. Your mother's health is getting worse because of this." I didn't reply. I'd learned that in my family, guilt was currency, and I wasn't buying anymore. But there was one message that did make me stop and stare. It came from my father, and it wasn't angry or emotional. It was just 3 words. He sold it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I read it again. He sold it. I opened my laptop and logged into the property records site. My stomach dropped when I saw the updated listing. The house, my house, was marked as pending sale. That couldn't be possible. The paperwork wasn't finalized yet. The eviction was still in process. I scrolled down and saw it, a forged signature again. My name. Evan had actually found a buyer. He'd managed to convince someone he had the authority to sell. I called my lawyer immediately, voice trembling as I explained what I was seeing. He went silent for a moment, then said, "All right, that's enough. We're escalating this. Now it's not just fraud, it's criminal." That night, sitting in my small apartment, I realized I'd officially lost everything that used to anchor me. My home, my job, my peace. My own blood had dragged me to rock bottom. But underneath the exhaustion and fear, something else started to stir. It wasn't anger anymore. It was precision. For the first time, I stopped reacting and started calculating. I knew Evan thought I was broken, that I'd just fade into the background while he claimed victory. But he'd made one mistake. He'd forgotten that I still had proof. Every message, every fake signature, every video, every footprint. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to forgive and forget. I was going to make sure he learned what it felt like to lose everything he thought he controlled. I never expected that hitting rock bottom would bring me a kind of peace I'd never had before. Maybe it's because when you lose everything, your home, your job, your sense of safety, you stop being afraid. There's nothing left they can take from you, and that makes you dangerous in a way they can't predict. The morning after I learned Evan had forged my signature again, I woke up before dawn and drove to my lawyer's office. I hadn't even slept. My mind was still running through every possible outcome: lawsuits, arrests, humiliation. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to protect them. I was thinking about how to protect myself. When I walked into the law firm, my lawyer, Mr. Haynes, was already there with 2 folders open. "I didn't wait for your call," he said. "I filed a fraud complaint first thing this morning. We're also filing a motion for an emergency injunction to freeze any sale or transfer of the property." He handed me one of the folders. Inside were neatly printed copies of every document I'd given him: the forgeries, the fake mortgage application, the harassment evidence. Seeing it all in one place was like looking at the autopsy of my family's love. This, he said, tapping the folder, is your shield and your sword. You've got enough here to not only stop them, but to make them face criminal charges. And I think it's time we make that very clear. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not the bitter, tired kind, but a genuine one. Do it, I said. That day marked the beginning of the shift. The moment I stopped being their scapegoat and started becoming a problem they couldn't manipulate anymore. Over the next week, Haynes worked fast. He contacted the city's fraud division, the county clerk's office, and even the supposed buyer of the house. Turns out, the buyer was a private investor Evan had met through one of his shady car flipping deals. The man had no idea the paperwork was fake. He thought Evan was acting on behalf of the family. When Haynes explained the situation, the buyer immediately backed off. In fact, he gave us an entire email chain of Evan promising a quick sale and bragging about how the paperwork's handled. That alone was enough to turn the investigation from civil to criminal. Then came the real twist. The buyer wanted to cooperate. He agreed to testify if needed, and even sent screenshots of Evan's messages. One of them said, "Don't worry, my brother's too much of a coward to do anything. I've got this handled." That line stuck with me for days. I think that was when I decided I wasn't going to settle quietly. I wanted Evan to see what it felt like to underestimate me. Haynes set up a meeting with the district attorney's office. We walked in with everything: the evidence, the timelines, the messages. The DA looked through it all carefully, then leaned back and said, "You're sitting on one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in a while. We'll pursue it." I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until I heard those words. After that meeting, everything started moving quickly. Investigators were assigned to gather statements. A subpoena was issued for the house's transaction history. Every fake document Evan had sent out would be traced. For the first time, they were the ones being cornered. And while that unfolded, something else changed in me. The anxiety that had followed me everywhere, the jumpy glances over my shoulder, the sleepless nights, the knots in my stomach, started to fade. I felt sharp again, focused. I spent my newfound free time rebuilding quietly. I got a part-time consulting gig through a friend, small projects at first, but steady work. It gave me enough breathing room to keep my bills paid without worrying about the lost job. The apartment started to feel like home. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine, and no one could take it from me. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was just to burn off the stress, but soon it became a ritual. I'd run as the sun rose, the streets empty and quiet, my breath syncing with the rhythm of my footsteps. For the first time in years, I felt control over my body and my mind. Every night, I checked in with Haynes. He kept me updated, sometimes with a hint of amusement. "Your brother's been dodging calls from investigators," he said one evening. He tried to claim the signature was a misunderstanding, but the handwriting analysis came back. No doubt it's his. "And your parents? They're in deeper than they think." Apparently, Evan had convinced them to sign certain documents as co-owners of the property, claiming it was just for insurance purposes. They'd signed without reading, which tied them directly to his fraud. When I heard that, I didn't feel satisfaction, just sadness. They'd always been blind where Evan was concerned, and now it was catching up to them. Still, I didn't stop the process. I couldn't. Not anymore. Around that time, something unexpected happened. I got a call from an old college friend, Lila. We hadn't talked in years, but she'd heard about what happened through mutual friends. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with all that," she said. "If you ever want to get coffee, I'm around." Normally, I would have turned it down, but for once, I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown. I told her the whole story, carefully, without too much bitterness, and she just listened. Really listened. No judgment, no fake sympathy, just quiet understanding. When I finished, she smiled softly and said, "You know, you're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for." That line hit harder than I expected, because for years, my family had made me believe I was weak, too sensitive, too emotional, too soft. Hearing someone say the opposite felt like air after drowning. We started meeting regularly after that. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence, and somehow that silence didn't feel heavy like the one I'd known before. Meanwhile, the case built momentum. The DA's office had gathered enough evidence to formally press charges against Evan: fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of property. It wasn't just civil anymore. It was criminal. When I got the official notice in the mail, I remember staring at it for a long time. Not out of joy or vengeance, but disbelief. For years, I'd been their scapegoat. Now the law itself was standing between us. Haynes called that night. Once the warrant's served, they'll probably panic, he said. Don't respond to any calls. Let the system handle it. He was right. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a flood of messages. Mom, Dad, even Tyler, using Evan's phone. Please, Corey, don't do this. You'll ruin his life. Corey, you're taking this too far. Be the bigger man. Every message was the same story they'd always told. That peace was more important than justice. That family was sacred even when it was toxic. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. Because peace without respect isn't peace, it's surrender. As the weeks went on, the power balance shifted entirely. My parents' house, the one Evan had tried to sell, was legally frozen. They couldn't touch it, couldn't refinance it, couldn't even use it as collateral. And since I was still the rightful owner, I had full authority to make decisions. Haynes called one afternoon, his tone casual, but with a hint of satisfaction. We've received confirmation that the county has frozen all related assets. That includes your brother's accounts linked to the fraudulent documents. He's, let's say, not pleased. I laughed. For the first time in months, a real, unguarded laugh. A few days later, I got a notice that Evan's so-called car business had gone under. Apparently, his investors had pulled out after hearing about the criminal investigation. He'd gone from bragging about being untouchable to watching everything crumble. Meanwhile, my life kept quietly improving. My consulting work grew. Clients liked my organization and discipline. One of them offered me a full-time position with better pay than my old job. I accepted without hesitation. I moved into a better apartment, bought a used SUV, even started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't look tired. It looked like someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. Then, about 2 months after the charges were filed, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line just said, "You won." It was from the same buyer Evan had tried to scam. The message was short. Thought you'd want to know. Evan tried to reach out again, offering to settle privately. I told him no. Some people only learn the hard way. Glad you stood your ground. I sat back in my chair and read it twice, then closed my laptop. Outside my window, the city lights flickered softly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitterness or rage, just quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes when the scales finally balance, even if only for a moment. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the family joke, the failure, or the overreacting brother. I was the one who survived their storm and learned how to build my own shelter. And though I didn't know it yet, the real reckoning hadn't even started. Because while I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, Evan was spiraling. And soon, the fallout would come crashing down on all of them. I kept the momentum, but I didn't let it turn into a spectacle. Revenge that's loud feels desperate. Revenge that's surgical is final. Over the next few weeks, I stitched together everything I'd gathered into a sequence that could not be ignored or swept under the same worn rug they'd always used to hide their mistakes. Haynes and the DA had already lined up the criminal case, enough for an indictment. But I realized that would take time and wouldn't necessarily fix the immediate damage or the humiliation. What I wanted was to take away the tools Evan used to brutalize everyone. His access, his money, his audience. I wanted him to lose the power he'd always used as a shield. I also wanted my parents to see, very clearly and without euphemism, what their choices had cost them. The setup was boring in all the right ways. I spent late nights drafting airtight civil claims, fraud, conversion, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then we filed them. Haynes obtained emergency relief to freeze any assets connected to the fraudulent paperwork and to place a constructive trust on anything Evan had moved under that pretense. That didn't sound dramatic, but it did 2 crucial things. It prevented him from selling or hiding assets, and it gave the courts a legal pathway to recover what had been taken. While the prosecutors prepared the criminal file, Haynes served civil process on Evan's business entities, on his investor accounts, even on the garage where he stored cars. We linked each item to the forged documents and to messages where Evan bragged about having it all handled. At the same time, I fed the right, quiet pieces of the story to the right people. The buyer who'd backed out agreed to cooperate publicly. He gave statements to the DA and sat down with a local consumer reporter who had a nose for shady small-town scams. We didn't go for viral outrage or social media piling on. That would have felt like me begging for witnesses. Instead, we focused on tangible, irreversible consequences. Banks reversed the fraudulent mortgage application, repossession agents put holds on vehicles purchased with tainted funds, and vendors that relied on Evan's paperwork pulled their contracts. Investors who had been on the fence got the documentation they needed to sever ties. Within days, his cash flow that kept his wheels turning, the little loans, the dealer lines, the shaky credit that made him swagger, started to dry up. What I liked most was how calm I felt through it. There was no gloating, no dramatic confrontations. Everything moved like a well-ordered machine. I sat at my kitchen table one afternoon with two folders. One contained the civil orders and the other emails and screenshots proving Evan's handiwork. I drove to the house, my house, because I wanted my parents to hear this from me, not from some neighbor or judge's letter. I wanted them to witness that the person they'd laughed at and dismissed had become the one who set the law in motion. I wanted them to stop pretending ignorance. When I walked in, the house smelled the same: dish soap and old coffee. And there was Evan in the living room, pacing like a caged animal, trying to look unconcerned. My mother was perched on the armchair, hands clasped so tight I could see the whiteness at her knuckles. Dad sat at the kitchen table, chin in hand, eyes hollow. I put the folders on the table and sat down like a guest at their breakfast. No theatrics, just me, my voice low and steady. I wasn't going to do this here, I said, and watched them flinch. But you all deserve to know how messy this gets when the people you protect make the rest of us collateral damage. I slid the first folder across to Dad. The court's temporary injunction, the freeze on the pending sale, the order to preserve all records. His fingers trembled as he opened it. He looked from the page to me and back again, like a man trying to reconcile two different life scripts written on the same day. He swallowed and said nothing. Evan scoffed, the old arrogance like a familiar rash. Is this some kind of joke? You going to lecture me about morals now? He'd always been theatrical. When cornered, he tried to perform bravado. I let him. I wanted him loud. The louder he got, the clearer his own words were when we'd already captured them in screenshots and witness statements. Listen to me, I said quietly, and for once he shut up. You forged my name. You tried to mortgage what belongs to me. You broke into my house and left a trophy that said you can't evict blood as a threat. That's not family protection. That's criminal conduct. I watched the color drain out of his face in stages. First the false flush, then the realization. The room had the vulnerable stillness of a jury waiting for the next exhibit. I didn't have to play the DA in person. Haynes had arranged for investigators to be in the area. They weren't expected at the house, but they were ready. What I did, instead, was pull out a small envelope and hand it to my mother. Inside were copies of messages she'd sent to Evan, instructions, coaxing him to do what's necessary to keep the home. It was careful, surgical evidence of her role in enabling him. She cried once, a tight, unexpected sound, and covered her face. Evan's phone buzzed then, frantic. He read a text, and his jaw dropped. No, 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 he stammered. They can't. He looked up at me, eyes wide and suddenly small. You set me up. There it was, the old projection. He tried to twist the story back onto me. I had the patience not to answer. There's a certain cruelty in silence when someone is trying to gaslight you. The silence becomes proof that you're not reacting because you don't have to. And then, precisely when the house felt like it might split open under the weight of all the truths, there was a sound at the front door. Heavy, official footsteps. Two plainclothes officers walked in, handed Evan a copy of an arrest warrant and a packet with criminal charges, and asked him calmly to come with them for questioning. He looked as if someone had yanked the rug out from under him. Dad started to weep, loud and helpless, and Mom clutched the armrest so hard her knuckles went white. It was ugly and real and final sounding. I didn't cheer. I didn't dance. I simply sat there and watched Evan's bravado unravel into terrified explanations. He tried to bluff and bargain and blame, and the officers listened without flinching, then let him out in cuffs when he could not satisfy their questions about the forged documents, the copied keys, and the fraudulent mortgage applications. As the car doors closed and the engine started, The whole neighborhood seemed to exhale. I felt a hollow kind of victory in my chest. Vindicating, yes, but also a sorrow I hadn't expected. I had taken him down, and in doing so I'd exposed my parents' complicity and stripped away the last of the illusions that had kept our family together. The house was safe from being sold that week. The buyer had reaffirmed his cooperation, and banks had reversed tentative transfers. My legal counsel told me we had a strong path forward for recovering damages and protecting the property. I had leverage now, and leverage is power that can be wielded carefully. But right as I was filing the last of the documents with Haynes that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a single line of text that made the floor tilt under me. "You think that's the worst of it?" The message was accompanied by a picture of a small, familiar cardboard box, one I recognized because I'd seen it before at the house, sitting in the middle of the driveway of a community center I used to volunteer at years ago, with no return address. I stared at the photo until my eyes watered. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear of physical harm and everything to do with understanding that this was far from over. I had won a legal battle and a public brace of justice, but there were other kinds of damage waiting: reputational blows, secrets, things Evan and whoever he trusted could still unleash. I closed my laptop, turned off the lamp, and for the first time since this started, felt that old, familiar adrenaline of a fight not yet finished. The officers had done their part tonight. The court had frozen their assets. Evan was behind bars for the night. But the text, the box picture, the tone, those told me that while I'd taken the first decisive cuts, there were deeper wounds waiting, and some of them would need a different kind of answer. I felt the shape of the next move assembling in my head, sharp and purposeful, and I knew I had to be even more surgical this time. The story was not over. When the police texted me a week later that Evan had agreed to a plea deal, I didn't feel the surge of triumph I expected, just the slow, quiet unclenching of a fist I didn't know I'd been making for months. The DA told me the charges were solid enough that Evan's lawyer had pushed him to take the deal: 5 years probation, full restitution, and forfeiture of his fraudulent assets. He'd also agreed to mandatory counseling for coercive familial behavior, a term that made me almost laugh. But the condition that mattered most was the restraining order. He couldn't contact me, visit me, or approach any property I owned. The law had finally drawn a border where I'd never been able to. Word spread fast. Small towns have long memories, and gossip travels quicker than wind. The same people who once admired Evan's charm started whispering about his fall. His investors pulled out completely. His so-called car business vanished overnight. The last time I saw him, at the courthouse, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in a month. His hair was grayer, his voice low, his bravado gone. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My parents didn't take it well. My mother sent one final message that said, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't reply. My father stayed silent. Eventually, I heard from a mutual friend that they'd sold off their possessions to pay the legal fines Evan's scheme had dumped on them. They moved into a small rental 2 towns over. The house, my house, was restored fully to my name and cleared of every fraudulent mark. But I didn't move back in. I couldn't. Too many ghosts lived in the walls, too many echoes of laughter that had turned into mockery. I decided to sell it myself, legally this time, and donated part of the proceeds to a local shelter that helped people escape toxic families and rebuild from nothing. Watching the sale close felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for years. Meanwhile, my own life had become startlingly simple. I'd kept my new job, earned respect for my discipline, and even started mentoring younger colleagues who reminded me of who I'd been before all of this: quiet, underestimated, afraid to speak up. Lila and I grew close, though not in a storybook way. She was just steady, someone who didn't need fixing, didn't demand apologies for scars she hadn't caused. We'd sit in the park on weekends, and she'd tease me for checking my phone too often. "They don't own your silence anymore," she'd remind me. She was right. The final piece came when the court mailed me the restitution check. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the signature at the bottom. Evans, scribbled shakily beneath a stamped note that read "paid in full." It was poetic, really. The same hand that had once forged my name was now forced to sign his own surrender. I didn't cash it immediately. For a while, I just left it pinned to my fridge as a reminder. Not of revenge, but of closure. Because revenge is noisy, But closure is quiet. Revenge feeds on anger. Closure ends its hunger. Months passed. One night, I went for a drive past the old neighborhood. The lights were dimmer than I remembered. The house looked smaller, lonelier. There was a for rent sign on the lawn and no laughter inside. For a moment, I thought about stopping, but then I realized there was nothing left to say. The version of me who would have still sought their approval didn't live there anymore. I rolled down the window, breathed in the cool air, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing. Before I turned the corner, I whispered something I'd wanted to say for years, something no one else would ever hear. You called me a failure. But the truth is, I just stopped failing to love people who never earned it. And with that, I drove away for good.